I think we're going to get
I was
started here.
related to the journalist.
I'd like to start on time, finish on time. Anyway, welcome to our constituent meeting that Edye and I do during the session, which we do this at least once a month. And we're always available outside of that, of course, either through email or however you want to communicate with us, either by phone, email, or at the State House. But typically, for those that may have not been here or haven't been here recently, what we do is we talk a little bit about what we actually do personally in our committees and the work that we do directly. And we'll spend a few minutes with that, and then we'll open it up for conversation, questions, and interest in your concerns and things that you're interested in. So we'll start with that. You want to go first?
Sure.
Okay.
All right. Hi, I'm Edye Graning. I live in Jericho, and I am in my second term, so starting my fourth year in the State House. I serve as the Vice Chair of the Commerce and Economic Development Committee in the House. And what else do I
don't know. You're on a task force. You do other things.
I just finished serving on the school district redistricting task force as the co-chair of that. And I today handed all that work off to the education committees. So maybe I take a break from that for a little bit. I don't know how that's going to go. We are working on a lot of different things right now in committee. It feels like we've been there for more than 3 days, but we have only been there for 3 days so far. We are working on updating the data broker registry, which I can talk about if anybody cares, but it's basically all of those companies behind the scenes that are collecting our data and selling it to other companies, and how we manage that in the state and the laws that they have to follow in order to have access to our data. We're going to talk more about data privacy, and this is the year it's going to happen. See if I just jinxed it or not. We had a report about a possible convention center for the state, and what that could do for tourism and to bring in revenues and what that would take. And they're halfway through their task force, and so we'll see what kind of information they bring to us. I think that's all we've done so far in the last 3 days. So we have other things coming up too.
Yeah, this is a little bit earlier in the month than what we've typically done this. It's just having to work in our schedule. Representative Trevor Squirrell. I live in Underhill here. This is my 10th year, my 6th year on appropriations, and prior to that, I had 4 years in natural resources, so I have an environmental interest and background also. I'm on appropriations, and my budget areas are the criminal justice system, so that's the judiciary, courts, it's Department of Corrections, it could be the state's attorneys, it could be the Attorney General's office, anything connected to the criminal justice system. And I also handle all the agency and natural resources, which is essentially the environmental portfolio also. I also chair the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, which meets year-round. The purpose of that committee is to oversee all the rulemaking by departments and agencies in the state of Vermont. We look at whether they're following legislative intent, that the rulemaking is not arbitrary, capricious, those kinds of things. Mostly pro forma, because things are typically not controversial, but as I was chatting with you about, sometimes they are very controversial. Right now we're dealing with neonics, which is the treated seeds and pollinators and things like that in that particular committee. And I also sit on the Justice Oversight Committee, which meets in the off session. On the appropriations side, right now we pass a budget every year. We haven't started the budget for FY27. We'll start that after the governor gives his budget address in 2 weeks. Right now, we're working on what's called the Budget Adjustment Act. And what that is we passed a budget last June for the fiscal year 26, which goes from July 1 to June 30th of 26. The budget adjustment is just what it sounds like. We're looking at the budget, other adjustments that need to be made based on whatever's going on out there. As we all know, there's a lot of different things potentially going on out there as a function, very much so, of the federal administration right now. So that's what we're working on. We'll do that for the next couple of weeks. One of the things, one of the mechanisms that puts the box around what we can do in the budget process is what we call a consensus forecast that we get twice a year in January and July. We're going to have one the end of next Friday. What we have is the legislature has an economist and the administration has an economist. Those two have to get together and agree on a consensus forecast going forward, where they analyze revenues and what's happening in the state, across the country, in the world, to come up with a projection about how much revenue will be available to create a budget. That will tell us what we can spend for the FY27 budget going forward that we're going to work on. That happens twice a year. We also can look at monthly data, and over the last few years we've continued to surpass all our projections, which is a good thing. That means we always have a little more money than what we might have anticipated to do things. When we finished FY25 going into 26, we carried forward about $183 million. And we're looking right now that we're probably going to see a forecast that's a negative $10 million in January. So we're starting to see that trend go the other way as the economy slows and the impacts of what's happening, the uncertainty in the economy, et cetera. Of that $183 million that we brought forward, there's still $110 million available for us to use in this budget year because that money was specifically set aside by us in May, June, not knowing what the federal government was going to do with programming. We have over $2 billion in Medicaid money, and then probably another $1 billion in federal money across other agencies. So obviously that's a huge issue for us. So we set aside $50 million that what we call the emergency board and the Secretary of Administration could allocate if something happened when we weren't in session, which is from June to now. And we have another $60 million broken across two places where it's reserved, but only if the legislature came back into session, in the off session, to address budget shortfalls because of federal actions. None of that money, the only money that was used out of that, if you remember the SNAP issue in October, we ended up taking $7 million out of one of those pots and using that so that folks in Vermont didn't go without their SNAP benefits. And the feds have told us we're not going to pay us back either for that. So anyway, for what that's worth. So we do have a fair amount of money that's going to carry forward also, which is going to be very useful. So that's my little bit of an update right now. And I guess we'll open it up to the floor for questions, comments.
Anything you want to share with us?
Anything you want to talk about.
Well, my primary concern as a parent in Chittenden East is the redistricting proposal that Phil Scott is sticking with in terms of consolidating all the different school districts into just a few. And I wanted to just pass on my concerns about that because it looks like, to me, they're trying to take a part that is working pretty well, all things considered, and break that down to make the financial part that isn't working work better, with no guarantee that it won't be to the detriment of the education that the kids are receiving now, and it would even save money. Our immediate example is a UID school, which was closed a few years ago after my 3 kids went through it. It was a great school, it was small. They didn't get ballet, but they got plenty of other stuff that was perfectly fine. And they closed it to save money, and we never heard anything about how that saved our district money. They just closed it. So my concern is that if this moves forward, it is going to make more of a huge corporation out of education, supposedly to save money, and I seriously doubt, one, it will save money, or two, it will benefit Vermont students.
I'm going to turn to my colleague here, who is the co-chair of that task force.
So if you would like to write a letter to the governor, that's what you should do. Your representatives here, I'm going to speak for Trevor, understand the work that the task force did in setting up cooperative education service areas in order to allow districts that don't have the capacity to work together on things that are low touch, high cost, right? Like there are some services, different things, and most of the districts in Chittenden County are at a size where we have efficiency of scale. And so to force Chittenden County into one big district is not going to be good for kids. I'll just say it bluntly. And I've said it every time I've had an opportunity to talk about it, and it won't save money. So in our district, we saved about $750,000 by repurposing the school. So it's an annual ongoing savings. It was at the time a $40 million budget. Now it's a $65 million budget, right? So costs are going up, and so we're not seeing those savings. And it wasn't a big savings, it was a small savings, and it's actually better for the kids and the students, and we can talk about that. And I know it was really, really hard, and I know people didn't like it, and I'm happy to talk about that more. But there are places in the state that have too many rooms, too many classrooms, and not enough students. And there are other schools that are near them, and consolidation would make sense because they would have better opportunity. But chopping the state up into districts because it looks better, because we think we're going to save money, because it might be something to do, doesn't make sense. And it isn't what Vermonters want right now, and it's not something that is going to be good for students or taxpayers, because there is an on-cost to any kind of change. So I am spending an awful lot of time talking to people in the State House about that, outside of the State House about that. There are things that we have to do. There are things that we can do. A giant consolidation is not that thing. And so, I am happy to take everything that you have to say about that to heart. I will use it, because sometimes when I have an opinion and then I hear from everyone it's something else, I go back and I learn more and figure it out. But when it's reinforcing what I already am very familiar with, I'm going to say, please write a letter to the governor.
I would do so, and I would encourage the legislature to look at healthcare funding formulas. That's the huge drivers for salaries right now, as I know as a former teacher. And it's outrageous. I know a lot of people who've lost their health care because the ACA subsidies are gone. And also look into income tax. So we try to fix the financial part without messing with the educational part.
So
Somebody really wants to drive their kid to Montpelier for a chess club twice a week, they can do that. Nothing is stopping them. But I don't think that's how Vermonters are really going to function with their children in communities.
So we wrote a 200-page report, task force report, and I'm happy to share that with anyone looking at all kinds of data from Vermont, from outside of Vermont. We learned what rural states are doing that help them save money and provide more equity, better education across the state. All of that is in the report, and I'm happy to share that. It's on the website. Thank you.
Yeah, and Edye this afternoon, Edye actually gave a presentation this afternoon to a joint committee on education committees on this very topic. So.
I was glad that the committee did not proceed with the
Sorry.
My daughter teaches in Winooski, and they are really concerned.
They are.
And so I'm sure she would really be interested. The task force, did you write, does that 200 pages include a recommendation not to go forward with 4 school districts for the whole?
Yes. Yeah, it talks about cooperative education service areas, which is a way for districts to come together at a different level to buy resources together, right? So if you're looking at education technology, for example, right now, most schools across the state, not most, many schools across the state are hiring a third party to do a little bit of research for them to figure out what kind of education technology is going to be best for their students. They're each paying the exact same, or 1 or 2, service providers to give them the same information. If we did that with one, education service area, getting the information for a quarter of the state, 20% of the state, 15% of the state, it would be a lower cost. We would still get the same information. We could do that with professional development, and smaller districts can do that with a lot of the back office things. So there are all kinds of ways to save money, and rural states across the nation use it, and it benefits their students by saving money and by providing a more consistent services and education for teachers, for professional development. So
how do you find, so what would be really helpful would be for people to read the
report.
The report, and then to write the governor in support.
So I keep it on my phone. I just have to find the right tab, and I will tell you what the website, where you can find it.
Okay.
If you want to go to the next question.
And I am sure my daughter will find people, a bunch of people in Winooski who are, because they've been willing to go stand, I think what they've been willing to do.
Yeah.
While she's looking for that, start another conversation? Other questions?
Continuing on the theme of education, I'm curious. So, Edye, you were talking about writing a letter to the governor, which seems potentially helpful.
Reasonable.
It also seems like both the House leadership and the Senate leadership they seem to still want to move forward with Act 70. Act 73 is written, and I'm curious how you all, in the caucus, are trying to engage with your leadership on keeping an open mind to a wider range of possibilities than Act 73 presented.
Yeah. I think on Tuesday, so Lori Houghton, the majority leader, was very clear that the work of the task force in Act 73 is highly valued by the caucus and is going to be used going forward, and that nothing is off the table. So there is this attempt to thread the needle to continue to work with the governor, because what we've seen is when the governor takes his ball and goes home, it's not productive for anyone. So we are trying to make that work. But I have felt very supported by our caucus. I know it doesn't always come across that way in the news, but I have.
Yeah, and I would second that. The governor gave his State of his State address yesterday, and 95% of it was education. That's his priority. And my takeaway is that he's threatening the budget over what he wants. But it is what it is, and we'll work with that. So,
I know this is an impossible number for you to give an answer for. I am curious. How many people in the state would the governor need to hear from for him to shift his thinking?
It's an impossible number. We heard from 5,000 in the task force when we reached out, and his response was, those are people who care about education, and there are more people who care about property taxes. So you know,
To be decided.
Is
I mean,
he
really,
up for
really, I mean, it's,
re-election
if he
anytime
chooses
soon?
to run again, he is.
What,
If he chooses to run again,
This year.
this year?
yep.
This year.
That's a good thing, remember?
But at the same time, property taxes are a problem, right?
oh, there's no question about that.
So something has to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we bought down property taxes in the last cycle, and I think most people agree that was a good thing to do for Vermonters, but it doesn't solve the problem, and carries over some of that problem. And, you know, the proposal we're gonna get from the governor is at least $70, $80 million worth of money that's available to us to pay it down again. We're not sure we're gonna support that, but at the same time, very sensitive to folks that have to pay these property taxes. So we have to get at the cost of, I should say not at the cost, but how we fund education. I think what happens here is that things like healthcare, things like education, where what was I reading the other day? It's like a nurse putting a bandage on someone they can't be more productive at doing that. It is what it is, okay? And inflation applies to it and what have you. And things like healthcare and education cost money, right? So it's not so much about cutting it. It's about what's an equitable way to fund that, and making sure that people buy in, and making sure that what we say we're doing, or are we providing an equitable quality education also? That's the other side of that coin, right? Because if you're doing that, most people will support that effort in one way or another, so.
Yeah, you can't take the people out of education and healthcare. So, and our salaries keep going up. So there is a cost associated with that, and how do we do it best? Not just better, but best, right? If we're gonna be, we're a small state, we're rural, we're never gonna be, 100,000 students concentrated in New York City. We're never gonna have that kind of, it's just not who we are. We have mountains, we have rivers, we have difficult terrain. So how do we maximize what we have and make it incredibly efficient and work statewide to do that and figure out a better way to pay for it, because property taxes are incredibly high.
And I'm a property owner, I own a home, I pay property taxes, but, and I was a teacher for many years. And I'm happy that in the state of Vermont, most of my taxes go towards education and infrastructure, because since having put 4 kids through the system, that is my value. And I'm willing to pay more than is comfortable, because we need this generation, future generations coming along. I'm also happy if our goal is for services to be equitable, which is not the same as equal. I don't expect the kids at Browns River to have all the exact same options as the kids at Edmonds or Burlington, as long as they have an option to go skiing, right? They have a lot of options. They don't have to be the same options. I go to a restaurant, I don't expect every single food in the world to be on the menu. I need a good selection. So I hope that people can look for deeper, comprehensive answers rather than quick expediency to solve our problems, which I hear both of you referring to, and I appreciate that.
Okay. Other folks? Yes.
I also am a homeowner here in Underhill,
And I have no kids, I have no connection to the school, and education is incredibly important to me too. And I want to see my property taxes going to support education.
Okay, thank you. Other folks?
Do you anticipate that you'll
What?
do more this term to look at healthcare and education as a linked issue in comparison to Act 73, which really took on education without taking on healthcare?
Yeah, I don't know that we're looking at it. We understand the interrelationship, right? But I don't think they're being connected in terms of a policy conversation, right? But there's, if education is number one, I'll just put it there, healthcare is probably number two.
And 3.
And three, you know, so, and in many ways, that's even more challenging because there's a lot of things out of our control, being a small state in a country, that makes it more difficult for us to manage. This is not an expertise for either one of us, healthcare, but we're trying to do the Green Mountain Care Board, I don't know how many people are familiar with it, that oversees the hospitals and our healthcare system, are doing an incredibly good job. And Owen Foster, who is the chair of that, is one of our constituents, but one of your neighbors, lives in Jericho. He's done an incredible job of working through that and trying to rein in costs and identify where, for instance, the UVM Health Network, there was some provision in budgeting that allowed them to get excess revenue, but we figured out, or he figured out, that the excess revenue on the Vermont side was being used to subsidize hospitals on the New York side. So you put a stop to that real quick. So, but legislatively, we've also looked at a few things. For instance, there's outpatient treatment, drugs, things like that. And a lot of hospitals really, the markup on those treatments it's absurd, okay? And the reasoning, if you get hospital folks to be honest, is that, well, we're subsidizing other things. And we're saying, no, that's not how it works. That's not fair to someone who has cancer and things like that. That's not the right way to provide health care. And so we passed legislation that, again, I don't know the details of how that's structured, but I think it's 120% of some market value or something like that. In other words, we cap what they can do with that. And if they need money to do other things, they need to figure out a different way to do that. So our healthcare committee and to some extent our human services committee, that's high on their list to work through these different areas. I think there's a lot of concern about supporting primary care and supporting those activities and functions that happen before people get to the hospital, right? And we just were recipients of a $195 million rural transformation health grant. And so they're working through how that's all going to flush out. But as you well know, at the federal level, we're also getting lots of things taken away from us too. And individually, people's premiums and things like that. So we're not necessarily ahead, but it's great to get a couple $100 million that some states are not getting to do this kind of work.
Yeah,
So.
and it's one-time money, so it has to be used in a one-time fashion. And
Yeah,
so
it is over 5 years, but essentially one-time
Yeah.
money. So, when you get, one of the things that I think Vermont did well during the pandemic and the different tranches of money that came through, particularly through the Biden administration, really, the agencies were really tasked, and we put a spotlight on making sure that the monies that were being spent were not for setting up programs that would have to be funded after the money stops, right? So, and I think we've done a pretty good job with that. For instance, the biggest tranche of money $1.2 billion, which is the ARPA money, the American Rescue. That all had to be obligated by the end of '24, and all of it has to be spent by the end of '26. And so our committee in particular is spending a lot of time with agencies and departments, making sure that we leave not a dime on the table that they can take back. And we're pretty close to it. So we're getting pretty good at that. So, other questions, comments?
One other thing, sorry. I heard the legislature has a bill in the works to protect the vaccination schedule that pediatricians would recommend for children, so that Medicaid and Medicare would continue, and insurance would continue to cover meningitis, flu, RSV, things like that that could kill children. Did either of you have information?
Vermont's going to hold the line on that. We're going to stay supporting that. We're not taking the federal guidance on that at all.
Good.
And we're part of a consortium in New England doing it, so we're not doing it alone. Okay. Other questions? Yeah.
Another thing that I didn't hear in the governor's State of the State address was any mention of affordable housing or making housing more affordable. Any words on that?
Well, we're going to continue to work on housing. We've passed a lot of legislation, put a lot of money into housing over the last 5 years in particular. For those of you that are following the housing issue, he came out with an executive order a few months back, and that's problematic at best because he's trying to relax through executive order wetlands regulations and some other environmental regulations and things like that. So, which is a non-starter for a lot of folks, including myself, and it's going to require rulemaking. And rulemaking comes under my purview in the committee I chair, Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. So it's going to be an interesting conversation when it gets there. So, but yeah, he's trying to do it by fiat, and it's a political stunt. Those are my words. That's my opinion. So
I wondered if there was a task force or a legislative.
The Committee on Environment is going to be taking testimony on that. If they didn't start today, I think they
Yeah.
start tomorrow. So, yeah.
yeah, I got information today from the chair of that committee about letters that they have had drafted by Legislative Council that was sent to me and my committee and stuff like that. So, yeah.
And I just want to say, both in the healthcare and in housing, we've done a lot in the last few years, and neither of those systems react quickly. So, one really great thing about the healthcare legislation that we passed is that the rates for healthcare for teachers went up only 7.2%, and it had been double digits for the last 3 years. And in the letter, when VHI sent it to schools, they said, this is in direct response to the legislation from the Vermont legislature. We're able to keep the rates lower. So there are things that are coming down, and there is more housing going up. We're focusing on these things. It's just going to take a little bit more time.
Yeah, one of the call a key piece of legislation last year was to provide resources for small communities that don't have infrastructure. Think about the flats, Underhill Flats, right? They don't have sewer or water and things like that you can connect to. Everything has to be on site. So if you're going to develop housing or even develop in general those areas, then you need infrastructure to do that. Now, it's very difficult for small communities or small communities within larger communities to figure out how to make that work. But there is now resources available, and with some of the new designations that, like village centers and things like that, the regulations around developing in those areas are less stringent, if you will. Because in order to get those designations, you've had to go through and do certain things, put certain things in place. Unfortunately, I do have to share that there are a couple stories across the state where we're offering this opportunity, and yet some towns, and I know of two right off the top of my head, that there was a push to develop infrastructure within the village center, and they took it to a vote, a ballot, and the town voted them both down. Even though they were basically going to be funded and supported in that effort. So that's a tension or maybe a frustration on the part of us as legislators to work on providing the opportunity for communities to do certain things and help solve some of these problems and not have folks take them on. So, having said that, there are a lot of other communities that do take it on, okay? So,
And Jericho is right now working on that. So.
yeah.
Other questions or comments? Yeah.
I have a few comments, I guess, and a question. So I'm new to Vermont, and we moved here in part because of the wonderful schools. And I also realized that property taxes are cost prohibitive for most people to move to the state. It's very, very difficult. So I can hold both of those things, that, we appreciate the excellent school system. That's why we moved. You get what you pay for, sort of thing. And property taxes are really difficult here. The other thing is that, so I'm from Tennessee, and so I've lived under an authoritarian, leadership. And so, we knew coming to Vermont would not save us per se, but it feels like a better place and, protecting the vaccine schedule and things like this. But, so it's more of like a high level view of like, what is Vermont going to do to shield us and protect us when ICE is killing mothers on the street? So that's my very loaded comment question.
It's a big question, for sure. And probably the best way for me to answer that, we're going to do everything we can. If you're following what's going on, which it sounds like you probably are, our Attorney General's been very busy in collaborating with other states around actions. The one committee that I'm on, Justice Oversight Committee, we had the Department of Corrections and the Agency Administration in our committee. We only meet off sessions. I was back in November, December, having this very specific conversation about the nature of the agreements that we have with our correctional facilities and ICE and Border Patrol and things like that, because the administration was actually going through a re-up, if you will, of the agreement, things like that. So there were some very pointed questions about what we are doing and what we've agreed to do because of what we might have agreed to in the past to do, and setting aside beds and things like that. And the pushback's almost unanimous on that.
But there's also an ICE facility in Williston, that's my understanding. It's like the technology.
There's an
which is
immigration
this
facility there,
surveillance,
yeah,
surveillance.
yeah. I don't know a lot about that.
Okay.
And
I think it's like disappointing to see that in our backyard,
oh, I agree.
Yeah. And I think I'm much more sensitive to it from like where I've come from. And so I think, letting in those little things. So that's just my, kind of feedback that I don't think that facilities like that should be allowed.
Yeah, one of the things I think I can share is that I've been there for 10 years now in the legislature. Yes, we have a majority, but I have a lot of Republican colleagues. I think Edye probably does too. Her chair's Republican.
Yep.
And it's not Washington, right? Vermont, I think, is a different place. I'm not going to say it's totally different in every other state, because I think there are probably some similarities elsewhere. I would be hard-pressed to find someone that supports that action on either side of the aisle in the State House. And I think what I'm trying to say, though, is that there's a lot of willingness to push back and support that pushback.
I guess that's what I'm saying. I'd like to
And we've got a
see pushback.
governor that's
Well-
pushing back.
Yeah,
And we have a border with Canada,
yes.
right? So we have to navigate that as well. I know that there have been conversations where there has been pushback, and you don't hear about the things that aren't happening that were requested of us. But I know, I am very aware of those happening. So there is not a, whatever you want, we're going to go along with it. And we have passed a number of laws last session to strengthen some of our protections based on things that were happening nationally or in other states. And so we care very much to keep Vermonters safe, and we're doing everything we can. So, that's, federal law is still federal law. We haven't seceded yet. I know the conversation comes up all the time, but we are still beholden to.
Yeah, and I think another examples of that too are we've had a number of requests from the federal administration for data in various programs and things like that, and
Our governor's been iffy.
what's that?
Our governor's been a little iffy on
Yeah, on that,
sharing that
but
data
beyond that,
too.
I know what you're talking about, and there's been a lot of pushback, and people have refused to do that. Agency heads, Secretary of State say flatly, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
So you're right. The governor's been wishy-washy on that a little bit.
Yeah.
The guard went to Venezuela, I believe, in the area. Hopefully, we won't let him go to Greenland.
Jeez.
There's a question behind you? Thanks.
So, just a little more general, but I think kind of related. As you go back into the State House this year, do you feel like something could be done? And I also am asking this because I'm on the Jericho Town Meeting Reimagine Task Force, where we're trying to find ways to have greater participation in the town meeting. I got involved because I'm involved with public access television. And I guess my question is, do you feel that, are you seeing things in Montpelier, or do you have ideas about how you could have more civic participation in Jericho and Underhill? Because I imagine you tend to hear from the same people again and again, and maybe you're wondering what the silent majority is thinking about things, especially when things are pretty divisive and hot, So I'm just curious, things you're seeing, whether it's like more like online voting or changes in open meeting law, if there's things you're excited about, or ways that you think that our neighbors could be more involved in the processes.
Well, we do support online voting, and not online, remote voting, mail-in voting, and that's been something that we've been doing here for years. The Secretary of State has been working hard to get more civics into the schools and has a Kid Governor program. I think that they celebrated, it's either this week or next week, which is super exciting, a governor. So that's the more we get our students used to these kind of things, that's what has been shown to increase participation. Once we're old and set in our ways, it's really hard to change. Speaking of myself, your name came up earlier, Mr. Foster. It's not something that either of our committees work on directly. But it's an interesting thought, thought experiment for us to have and to understand that. Both of us try to be in the community for everything and go to as many events so that we're meeting people where they are because we know that unless somebody is really angry, they don't come find you. I mean, this is lovely. This is a great group. And nobody has a pitchfork, which is amazing. But so that's what we do, and that's what we try to do. I don't know if you have.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard to get at what you call the silent majority, right? Because a lot of it comes to us through various, whether it's at the State House or whether it's through email and things like that. And certainly, I think the predominant communication that I receive is email communication. And do my best to respond to that. But I think what Edye says is very true. We do try to get out to all the events that we can, because just by walking around and chatting with people and bumping into people, maybe they wouldn't make the trip here, but they might have something to chat about or something like that. You know, what's interesting to me is that when we are in the State House through those number of months, there are a lot of kids, classes and schools, buses all the time. Matter of fact, it gets overwhelming sometimes. And we feel like it's going back to elementary school with the sniffles and the colds that we all get, about 2 or 3 colds during the course of the session. So, yeah, we're always having a conversation about civics. I have a personal opinion about that. I think it should be mandatory in school, but anyway.
You had a question over here.
Well, I just had a comment after what you said about what's going on with ice and stuff, because my daughter is in Winooski, and they had a mother in their 2nd grader.
Yeah.
And, you know, it has affected both faculty and students that,
Yeah.
so those things are happening right here in Vermont.
Yeah. The federal government, the changes in the federal government this past year have impacted us in this state in so many ways, directly and indirectly. I mean, this is, you know, there have been a few cases, not just this family, but there have
Right.
been a few, right?
Well,
We-
their superintendent tried to get back in the country.
Yep, and Wilmer, yeah. So, you know, Trevor was mentioning our budget shortfall. We're going to have a little bit of a shortfall this year. It's probably going to be attributed to the lack of folks from Canada coming here for tourism. There had about a third fewer reservations from Canada than they have in any recent year. And we rely on tourist dollars. That's one of the biggest engines. I think it's the biggest engine in the state, right? Bringing in tax revenues. So I think all we can do is, we do all we can do, and we keep doing it, and we keep doing our best, and we hope that we can insulate ourselves from what's happening federally the best that we can, and we rally around the families that need us the most. And it's a hard time to be in government. It's a hard time to be a citizen. So I need something much happier than that to end on, though.
Other questions, comments?
This might not be the happiest thing.
No, you have to have something.
Prepare for.
I'm curious if you all in the House, and maybe perhaps even the House Democratic Caucus, are thinking at all about ethics. I was struck by the Senate Ethics, Committee and their recent dealing with the 2 senators who were who worked at the private schools and their relation to Act 73. And it occurred to me that in reading what the Senate Ethics Committee said about that, they relied on these very narrow definitions of what ethical violations might be, when someone could also look and take a much sort of broader perspective and say, yeah, if you have an interest, like even if it's not a personal financial interest, you probably shouldn't be working on that bill. And I also recognize we're a small state, and that we're small enough that, like, you all have, many of you have other careers, right? People in the legislature have other jobs, and we have citizen legislatures, and so it's almost impossible to find people who don't have some relation. But yeah, I was struck by the fact that these two senators were sort of said, there's no violation because of these really specific rules, as opposed to saying, yeah, actually, maybe we shouldn't allow this to happen. And I'm wondering if you all in the House, and specifically in the Democratic Congress, have thought about trying to take that on in some way. Like, I recognize that Vermont is not Washington, D.C., and the level of sort of, I don't want to say corruption, but sort of conflict of interest that happens in D.C., it probably isn't happening here, I don't think. But yet, I wonder, I'm wondering if you all think about that.
Well, I think on the House caucus side, I don't think there's a lot of conversation about it right now, but you bring up an interesting case with the two senators and their involvement with the education piece. And I think that, and this is a personal opinion of mine now, and I know both those senators very well. They sit at one of my committees. Okay. So, but that one of those senators was appointed by the pro tem to run that committee. And I wonder if he made a good choice in that regard. And I'll just leave that there, okay? When we're voting on a bill, not so much working on a bill, but we're sitting on the floor and a bill, the way it's explained to us, it's like if it specifically impacts something that's connected to us, then there's a way for us to say we're not voting on this, right? But if I'm part of an organization that it impacts, but it also impacts all the other organizations, then that's really not a self-interest, right? And I think the same thing applies if you're working on something. I've been involved in a lot of boards, and I've been executive director of a number of organizations. And I've always, my position has always been that we all have biases, okay? I think it's important for us to understand what our biases are and make sure that it doesn't unduly influence the work that we do. And I think that's what's most important. But that's a personal responsibility, right? So.
Yeah, I have so much to say about that. But what I will say is the voters in those towns are really happy with the way that their senators behaved. And so when that's the situation, that's the situation. So, and 2 years ago, we tried to do some more stringent disclosures and sharing more information, and the House passed it and it died in the Senate.
Senate did.
So we're not the best at that in Vermont. Like, that is an area that, we get a C rating, I think, if you look at disclosures and those kind of things. And it's, in theory, because we're a citizen legislature and we all have other jobs and it's such a small state and we represent, we're just tentacles everywhere. And we could and should do better. And, I appreciate that folks would hold us accountable for that more, because, that was something that I thought should have passed. It was not even, it would have taken us like from the C, I think it's around a C, to like a B- rating, right? It was a small step, and we couldn't even get that through the Senate. So, yes, we need to do better.
A few more minutes. Anybody else?
Do either of you have cards that, or can you tell me how to look you up and get your email address or what?
I can give you my email. I have cards in the car. I just didn't bring them in, 'cause I didn't
I
have
don't have my
pockets.
cards, but
But yeah, my email is EGRANING at leg.state.vt.us.
.gov.
Yep.
and mine would just be Squirrell 2 L's, with the rest of it that Edye has on hers. People like to put 1 L on my name, so.
Yeah, sometimes I do, and he doesn't get my emails then.
Okay, any other?
So, and I do have the website, but it's a very long on the task force report. So what I will say is
Well, I will
Google
send you an
Vermont
email.
redistricting. Yeah, send me an email and I'll send it to you. Or if you Google redistricting task force report, it will come up. But it's got more dots than my email does, so,
Yeah.
and slashes.
That's what I was thinking, I'd send you a.
Great.
I'm sorry to do, I just, because he kept asking one more.
Yeah.
Edye, can you say like just a quick, what we should watch for with the data protection laws that are, they're forming in Montpelier? 'Cause
Yeah.
I think that's something we're all concerned about and curious what's happening with our data online.
We've been talking about data privacy for 3 years, the whole time I've been in the House in my committee. We found that when we wanted to put in really strong data protection, the lobbyists from big tech came in droves, and they come in multiple groups. So you can find, pick your big tech, in 6 different lobbying groups, and they all come to tell you what a horrible thing you're doing by putting these protections down. We have now figured out that we have 2 areas so in those 3 years, many other states have passed data privacy laws, which is great for us because we're so small, right? We're almost 650,000 people. So companies aren't going to make changes for us. And so what we're looking at now is how do we follow some of the best practices that have been passed in other parts of the state and other parts of the country, and still protect Vermonters in a way that's robust. The biggest sticking point has been the private right of action. And so what that means is the way that our consumer protection laws are, any Vermonter that's harmed by any consumer product has the ability to sue that maker, whoever made that product. And that is underlying every consumer product in the state. And I don't think it's going to be there for data privacy. I think we're going to have the Attorney General as the enforcement mechanism for that. That has been the biggest sticking point, and that is the thing that the governor has said he will veto if it's in there. So, and he has looked at other things that had that in them and vetoed it So we're trying to figure out how to protect consumers, fund the Attorney General's office so that they can provide robust protection, and in the case of a violation. I think we have some really good options going forward. I think it came to us from the Senate. We're going to have to make some changes. It came to us at the end of last session, and I think, knock on wood, sorry about the microphone, that we will have some, so what to look for, we're going to start talking about it next week in our committee. Actually, next Wednesday morning, we have a joint hearing with Senate Economic Development to talk about what data privacy actually looks like and what it looks like when the cookies are tracking you and how that works. Which might be interesting. All of our committee meetings are recorded. If you're having trouble falling asleep, you can tune in. You can watch anytime you want. But that's the kind of thing that hopefully will help to get everybody on the same page so that we can get this done. And then we'll have to modify it every year because technology moves so fast.
Yeah, Edye makes a good point. One of the silver linings of COVID, if there is any, is the technology evolution that's taken place, at least in the State House, where we're in a hybrid environment now where we're in person, but people can, Zoom and what have you, but everything's recorded and everything's available. And those live stream entry into portals and things like that are on all the web pages of all the committees. So all you have to do is click on those and you can get to them. Or you can go to YouTube and get all the recordings of anything that you might be interested in. So it is a little difficult to navigate because it's just a big volume of information. But if there's an area that you're interested in, you can do that on your own, or you can reach out to either one of us to help you with that. So.
And if you're ever in the State House, come
Oh, yeah.
find either one of us. We're always happy to show you around and come sit in on our committees. Anybody is welcome anytime. It's the people's house. So might only be interesting for a few minutes, but we like to have you visit.
Well, thank you for being here this evening. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
And if anyone is a Jericho resident and wants to sign my petition to get on the ballot for school board again, I have it here, just the petition to put my name on it.